The air in Pelican Bay State Prison was a physical weight. It smelled of bleach, stale sweat, and the low-tide rot of desperation. For 5 years, this air had been the only thing Corbin Hayes truly owned. Every morning, the lockdown buzzer shrieked like a dying bird, and Corbin would rise from his concrete slab, his movements precise, economical. At 500 hours, his feet hit the cold floor. 50 push-ups, knuckles to the concrete, perfect form. Another 50 sit-ups. A routine carved from a former life. A life where discipline meant survival, not just enduring the slow tick of a life sentence. He was inmate, Nara 73406, a number assigned to a man convicted of murdering a real estate tycoon named Marcus Thorne. A black ex-Marine Force recon painted as a violent predator, a perfect villain for a San Francisco jury. Corbin moved through the prison's ecosystem with a quiet intensity that the other inmates mistook for emptiness, but the guards recognized as something far more dangerous. Control. He never joined a gang, never played the politics of the yard. His space was his own, earned not through bravado, but through an unnerving stillness. He was a black hole on the periphery, a man whose gaze held the flat, hard calm of someone who had seen true chaos and found it unimpressive. The other men, scarred and loud, gave him a wide berth. They sensed that to provoke Corbin Hayes was to unlock a door to a room they did not want to enter. His life was a monochrome loop. The clang of steel doors, the gray mush they called food, the deafening roar of the mess hall, and the 8 hours of mind-numbing labor in the prison laundry, folding sheets that smelled of industrial soap and the faint despair of the sick and the incarcerated. He held on to one thing, the belief that the system, flawed as it was, would eventually correct itself. An appeal, a new piece of evidence, a deathbed confession. His innocence was a cold, hard stone in his gut, and his wife, Amara, was the keeper of that faith. Her monthly visits, her tearful assurances that she was fighting for him, were the only splashes of color in his gray world, that fragile hope shattered on a Tuesday. The laundry was a steam-filled hell, the air thick enough to chew. A lifer named Weasel Pete, a man who traded in whispers and misery, sidled up to him at the sorting table. Pete's eyes darted around, his voice a low, conspiratorial hiss. "Heard something about your wife, Hayes," he mumbled, not making eye contact. Corbin didn't react, his hands continuing their steady rhythm, folding a coarse prison blanket. Indifference was armor. "Yeah," Pete pressed on, sensing he had an audience. "My cousin's out of SF, does valet at one of them high-rise places, sees her all the time." Corbin's hands paused for a fraction of a second. Pete saw it and grinned, a flash of yellowed teeth. "Sees her with some slick suit, real fancy. Not just once, man, regular thing. They ain't just talking legal strategy, if you catch my drift." Corbin turned his head slowly, his dark eyes locking onto Pete's. The air between them grew cold. "What are you saying, Pete?" His voice was dangerously soft, a low rumble that cut through the hiss of the machines. Pete swallowed hard, his confidence wavering. "Just saying what I heard, man. He drives a black Porsche, wears $1,000 suits. They say he's some hotshot lawyer." Corbin's world, already a cramped concrete box, began to shrink until it was nothing but the roaring in his ears. Amara, his Amara, the woman who wept for his freedom, was with another man. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He felt a white-hot rage begin to smolder deep inside him, a fire he had suppressed for 5 long years. But it was Pete's next words that turned the smolder into an inferno, the kind that razes everything to the ground. He leaned in closer, his voice barely audible over the machinery, delivering the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. "Yeah, a real shark. My cousin asked who the guy was. You ain't gonna believe this shit." Pete paused for dramatic effect. "His name is Darian Price." Darian Price. The name didn't just echo in the cavern of Corbin's mind. It detonated. It was the name of the prosecutor who had stood before a jury and methodically dismantled his life. Price, with his tailored suits, his polished rhetoric, and his uncanny ability to twist Corbin's service into a liability. He could still hear Price's voice, smooth and venomous, in his closing argument. "Look at the defendant, ladies and gentlemen. Corbin Hayes, not a citizen, but a weapon. A man trained by our own government in the art of silent, efficient killing. A Marine recon. He is not like you or me. He is a man with a switch, and Marcus Thorne, by simply denying him a security contract, flipped that switch. Price had painted him as a walking embodiment of black rage, a stereotype wrapped in a military uniform. He had used Corbin's impeccable service record not as proof of character, but as an indictment of his capacity for violence. And the jury, mostly white, mostly suburban, had bought it completely. They looked at Corbin and saw not a decorated veteran, but the monster Price had crafted for them. Now, that same man was sleeping with his wife. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a desecration. It was a victory lap on the ruins of his life. The cold stone of innocence in his gut turned to molten lead, burning through him. Every letter from Amara, every tear shed behind the visitor's glass, was now cast in the sickening light of this new reality. Had it all been a lie? Had she been with Price the whole time? The thought was a shard of glass twisting in his soul. The system hadn't just failed him. It had conspired with the woman he loved to bury him alive. The cost to confirm Weasel Pete's story was steep in prison currency, 3 months' worth of commissary, coffee, ramen, postage stamps, and a promise to make a certain Aryan Brotherhood shot caller in C-Block trip during yard time. It was a price Corbin paid without hesitation. 2 weeks later, the confirmation came back through the prison's invisible network, a crumpled note passed in a hollowed-out bar of soap. It was a grainy printout from a society blog, a photo from a charity gala in San Francisco. There she was, Amara, radiant in a sapphire dress, her hand resting comfortably on the arm of a smiling Darian Price. The caption read, "Prominent defense attorney Darian Price and art gallery owner Amara Hayes enjoying the San Francisco Symphony's annual fundraiser." The date on the article was 6 months ago. That night, Corbin lay on his bunk, the photo burning a hole in his pocket. The low hum of the prison faded away. The shouts, the distant alarms, the rattling of keys, it all disappeared. In its place was a silence that was not peaceful, but predatory. The hope for an appeal, for justice through the proper channels, evaporated like mist. It was a fool's game, a rigged table where he was destined to lose. He had played by their rules, and they had taken everything. Now he would play by his. A new kind of discipline took over, the one they had honed in him in the dusty landscapes of Afghanistan and the sweltering jungles of the Philippines. Reconnaissance, planning, execution. His mind, once occupied with legal precedents and appeal deadlines, now became a map of the prison. He started observing, not just seeing, the guard rotations, the blind spots in the camera coverage, the precise schedule of the supply trucks. He noticed that the garbage truck, a massive compactor that serviced the prison kitchen every Thursday at 0400, had a predictable routine. The driver, a fat, lazy man named Sal, always left the engine running for 3 minutes, while he signed paperwork inside the gatehouse, out of sight of the yard cameras. 3 minutes. An eternity for a man who could move like a shadow. The escape was no longer a fantasy. It was a mission, and Corbin Hayes had never failed a mission. The stench hit him first, a gag-inducing cocktail of rotten food, sour milk, and chemical disinfectant. Huddled inside a heavy-duty trash bin in the pre-dawn chill of the prison kitchen, Corbin controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate the way he'd been trained to do in enemy territory. He was wrapped in 3 layers of thick plastic bags, a desperate measure to mask his heat signature from any thermal scans at the gate. The bin was hoisted up by mechanical arms, and for a terrifying moment, he was suspended in the air before being slammed down into the cavernous, dark belly of the garbage truck. The compactor blade groaned to life just feet away, a hydraulic hiss that promised a brutal, anonymous death. This was the razor's edge, the point of no return. Darkness. The roar of the engine was his only companion as the truck rumbled through the prison's final checkpoints. Every bump, every gear shift was a jolt of pure adrenaline. He counted the seconds, tracking the route in his mind. When the truck finally stopped for what felt like the 3-minute window he'd gambled his life on, he moved. He sliced through the plastic with a sharpened piece of metal, clambered over piles of reeking refuse, and dropped silently from the back of the truck into the foggy darkness of the Northern California coastline. He stripped off the inmate jumpsuit, revealing the dark gray orderly uniform he'd stolen piece by piece over weeks. Then he melted into the redwoods that lined the highway, a ghost slipping free from his concrete tomb. Hours later, and miles away, in the sterile, coffee-scented air of the San Francisco Police Department's Homicide Division, the news landed like a grenade. "He's out," Captain Miller announced, his voice grim. "Corbin Hayes escaped from Pelican Bay less than 4 hours ago." Detective Lucas Benji, a man whose weary face was a roadmap of too many grim crime scenes, looked up from his paperwork. "Pelican Bay? Nobody gets out of Pelican Bay." "Well, somebody just did," Miller snapped, tossing a file onto Benji's desk. "He's X-Force Recon, highly trained, highly dangerous. The warden thinks it was a professional job. We're setting up a task force. You're leading, and you're getting a new partner." He gestured to a woman standing quietly by the door. "This is Detective Neela Abdullah, transfer from Chicago's Behavioral Analysis Unit." Benji sized her up. She was younger than he expected, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to be taking in everything at once. She didn't look like a street cop. She looked like a scholar who had wandered into the wrong room. "Behavioral analysis?" Benji grunted, skeptical. "We're hunting a fugitive, not trying to understand his childhood." Neela met his gaze without flinching. "Sometimes, Detective, understanding the childhood is how you predict where the fugitive will run. May I see the file?" Her voice was calm, analytical, a stark contrast to the barely controlled chaos of the squad room. Benji pushed the file across the desk. Neela opened it, her eyes scanning the pages with unnerving speed. She absorbed the details of the original murder, the trial, the conviction. The official narrative was clean, simple. A decorated but volatile veteran snaps and kills a businessman. "His wife, Amara Hayes, still lives in the city," Miller said, pointing to a page. "Owns an art gallery in Hayes Valley. That's your first stop. He'll go to her. They always do." Benji nodded. It was Fugitive 101. They seek money, comfort, a familiar face. They make mistakes. "We'll set up surveillance, lean on the wife. He'll surface." But Neela wasn't looking at the wife's address. She was staring at a photo of Corbin Hayes from his military service file. The man in the picture stood straight, his expression resolute. There was discipline in his eyes, not malice. Then she flipped to the crime scene photos from the Marcus Thorne murder. A professional soldier, a man trained in stealth and leaving no trace, had supposedly left his own gun, covered in his fingerprints, right next to the body. It was too neat, too perfect. "Captain," Neela said softly, still looking at the file, "this doesn't feel like a man running for cover." Her eyes lifted to meet theirs, a flicker of something sharp and unsettling in their depths. "This feels like a man on a hunt." San Francisco was a city of ghosts for Corbin. Every corner held a memory, a coffee shop where he and Amara had their first date, a park where they had walked their dog, the curve of the bay where he'd proposed. Now, these memories were landmines in a hostile landscape. He was the ghost, a wraith moving through the city's circulatory system of alleyways and transient camps. He'd traded the stolen orderly uniform for worn jeans and a hoodie at a charity drop box, his face obscured by a beanie pulled low. His military training kicked in, a second skin of situational awareness. He saw the surveillance cameras, the patrol car routes, the subtle tells of undercover cops. He was a predator in his own city, and his prey was the truth. Meanwhile, Detectives Benji and Neela walked into a different world. The Amara Hayes Gallery was a temple of minimalist chic, white walls, polished concrete floors, and large, abstract canvases that bled color and emotion. The air was cool and smelled faintly of expensive candles. It was a world of quiet wealth and curated taste, a universe away from the grit and grime of Pelican Bay. Amara Hayes herself was a part of the exhibition. She was stunning, dressed in a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit, her expression a carefully composed mask of concern. "Mrs. Hayes," Benji began, his voice sounding rough in the serene space, "we're here to inform you that your husband, Corbin Hayes, has escaped from prison." Amara brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes widening. The performance was flawless. She sank into a sleek leather chair, the picture of a shocked and terrified wife. "Escaped? That's impossible. Corbin wouldn't—" "And yet he did," Neela interjected, her tone neutral. She wasn't watching Amara's face. She was watching her hands. They were trembling, but not with fear, with something else. Neela recognized it as the tremor of a high-stakes lie. "Has he tried to contact you, Mrs. Hayes? Any calls, emails, messages through friends?" "No, nothing," Amara said, her voice a little too quick. "I can't imagine why he would. We've grown apart. 5 years is a long time." Benji followed the standard script, warning her about the legal penalties for aiding and abetting a fugitive. Amara nodded, her eyes downcast. But Neela leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. "Grown apart, or have you moved on?" The question hung in the air. Amara flinched, a flicker of genuine panic in her eyes before the mask was back in place. I've been seeing someone," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It's recent. I was going to tell Corbin." Benji, ever the pragmatist, got straight to the point. "What's his name? We need to know who might be a target." Amara hesitated for a long moment, twisting a silver ring on her finger. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words. Neela didn't push, she just waited, letting the silence do the work for her. Finally, Amara looked up, her eyes meeting Neela's. "His name is Darian," she said. "Darian Price. He's an attorney." Benji's pen stopped scratching on his notepad. He looked up, a slow frown spreading across his face. He remembered the name from the case file, but it was Neela who saw the entire board rearrange itself. It wasn't just a complication, it was a connection. The grieving wife of a convicted murderer was in a relationship with the very man who had put him behind bars. Coincidences like that didn't happen in murder cases. They were manufactured. The fugitive hunt had just taken a sharp, dark turn. Neela slid her card across the polished table. "If you hear from your husband, you call us immediately. For your own safety," she said, her eyes boring into Amara's. "We'll have a patrol car watching this gallery and your home around the clock." As they walked out into the cool San Francisco air, Neela turned to Benji. "She's not afraid of Corbin finding her," she said with chilling certainty. "She's afraid of what he already knows." Back at the precinct, the squad room buzzed with the energy of a full-scale manhunt. Phones rang, keyboards clattered, and a map of San Francisco was being gridded out for a systematic search. But Neela Abdullah sat in the eye of the storm, a pool of quiet focus amidst the chaos. The Corbin Hayes case file was spread across her desk like a complex puzzle. To everyone else, it was a closed case, the story of a killer. To Neela, it was a work of fiction, and she was determined to find the author. "You're still on that?" Benji asked, dropping a styrofoam cup of black coffee on her desk. "We should be focusing on where he is now, not where he was 5 years ago." "The where he was is why he's running," Neela replied without looking up, her finger tracing a line in the forensics report. "And it's not adding up. Listen to this." She began to deconstruct the prosecution's case with surgical precision. The murder weapon, a Glock 17, was registered to Corbin. Convenient. But according to his military psych evaluations, his personal weapon of choice was always a Sig Sauer P226. Marines are creatures of habit, Lucas. Why would he use a different weapon for a crime of passion? "Maybe it was all he had," Benji shrugged, taking a sip of his coffee. "Maybe," Neela conceded. "But then there's the entry. The report says Corbin broke into Marcus Thorne's penthouse office. But the security logs show Thorne's keycard was used to access the executive elevator exactly 3 minutes before the estimated time of death. The security guard on duty, the one who testified he saw Corbin looking agitated in the lobby earlier, quit his job 2 days after the trial and moved to Florida. He was paid a severance of $50,000 from one of Thorne's shell corporations. Benji stopped drinking his coffee. He leaned against her desk, his skepticism beginning to fray at the edges. "Okay, that's sloppy. Or maybe just a loose end." "It gets better," Neela continued, her voice gaining intensity. She pulled up another file on her computer. "This is Darian Price. At the time of the trial, he was a star prosecutor for the DA's office. The Thorne conviction made his career. He resigned 2 months later to start his own private defense firm, specializing in high-profile corporate clients. Do you know how much capital it takes to open a firm like that in downtown San Francisco?" She turned the screen towards Benji. "I ran a preliminary financial check. The seed money for his firm came from an anonymous trust, a trust that, after 3 layers of offshore accounts, traces back to a holding company. Neela paused, letting the weight of her next words sink in. A holding company controlled by the late Marcus Thorne. Lucas Benji was silent for a full minute, the noise of the squad room fading into the background. The neat, simple case of an escaped killer had just fractured into 1,000 pieces. The prosecutor hadn't just won a case. He had seemingly profited from the victim's death, and now he was sleeping with the convicted man's wife. "So, you're saying," Benji started, his voice low. "I'm saying the man who had the motive, means, and opportunity to kill Marcus Thorne wasn't Corbin Hayes," Neela said, her eyes burning with conviction. "It was Darian Price. He needed Thorne out of the way to gain control of his assets, and he found the perfect scapegoat. A decorated black veteran with a specialized skill set that could be easily twisted by a jury susceptible to racial bias. He didn't just frame Corbin Hayes, he used the entire justice system as his weapon." Benji stared at the screen, then back at Neela. The manhunt was still on, but the target had suddenly, terrifyingly, changed. They weren't just hunting a fugitive anymore, they were potentially hunting a monster who wore a badge of justice. While Neela Abdullah was unearthing the ghosts of his past in a sterile office, Corbin Hayes was living amongst them. He'd found a temporary refuge in the forgotten spaces of the city, a condemned warehouse south of Market Street, its cavernous interior smelling of rust and rainwater. From this gritty sanctuary, he began his own investigation. He was a ghost with a purpose. He stole a burner phone and a beat-up laptop from a pawn shop, paying with cash he'd earned from a day's labor unloading trucks at the docks, his face hidden under a grimy cap. He was invisible, just another nameless worker in the city's engine room. His first target was Darian Price. Corbin became his shadow. He watched from across the street as Price left his gleaming high-rise apartment in Pacific Heights, a fortress of glass and steel that looked down on the rest of the city. He followed Price's black Porsche as it sliced through morning traffic, the man inside completely oblivious, cocooned in his world of wealth and power. Corbin watched him hold court in expensive restaurants, his laughter echoing as he glad-handed other men in tailored suits. This was the life Price had built on Corbin's freedom, a life of casual opulence that was a constant bitter insult. Then he turned his attention to Amara. He parked a stolen, battered pickup truck a block from her gallery, the windows tinted with city grime. He watched her come and go, her movements precise, her smile for clients bright but brittle. He saw the patrol car Neela had promised, making its slow, predictable rounds. An amateur's security. To Corbin, it was a minor inconvenience, not a barrier. He saw the tension in Amara's shoulders, the way she clutched her phone, the quick, nervous glances she cast over her shoulder. She was a prisoner in her own beautiful, curated life. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Not love, not anymore. It was a hollow ache, the phantom limb of a life that had been amputated. One evening, driven by a need he didn't fully understand, he decided to get closer. He waited until after the gallery had closed, the police car having just passed on its hourly route. Using a set of lockpicks he'd fashioned from a street sweeper's discarded bristle, he slipped through the gallery's rear service door in under 10 seconds. The building was silent, the abstract paintings on the walls like sleeping giants in the dim security lighting. He moved with a liquid grace, a shadow flowing through the familiar space. He found himself outside her office. A light was on under the door. He could hear her voice, strained and sharp. She was on the phone. His heart hammered against his ribs as he pressed his ear to the cold wood of the door. "You don't understand, Darian?" Amara's voice was a tight wire of panic. "He's out. He's not stupid. What if he knows? What if he comes for us?" There was a pause as she listened. "No, the police are useless. They're watching the front door. Corbin, you don't know him. If he wants to get in, he will get in." Her voice broke, a sob catching in her throat. "This whole thing, it's falling apart. I can't live like this anymore. The lies are eating me alive." Another pause. Corbin could almost hear Darian's smooth, placating tones on the other end of the line. "Don't tell me to calm down!" she suddenly shrieked, her voice cracking with a hysteria that was raw and real. "You promised me he would be gone forever. You promised me we would be safe." Corbin pulled back from the door, his breath catching in his throat. It was confirmation, a verbal confession. She knew. She had been a part of it. The hollow ache in his chest solidified into a block of ice. He wasn't just observing a cheating wife. He was listening to his own executioner. And in that moment, the mission changed. It was no longer just about clearing his name. It was about dismantling the lives of the two people who had stolen his. The cold reality of Amara's complicity settled over Corbin like a shroud. He remained frozen in the silent hallway of the gallery, the echo of her panicked voice ringing in his ears. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted to be his anchor to the outside world, had been his Judas. He stayed in the shadows, listening, his every sense on high alert. The conversation continued, Amara's fear clashing with what sounded like Darian's cold, dismissive reassurances. Then the tone shifted. "I can't do this anymore, Darian," Amara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, laced with a terrifying resolve. 5 years. I've lived with this for 5 years. Corbin's escape. It's a sign. I have to make it right. A long, tense silence followed. Corbin held his breath, straining to hear. "No," she said finally, her voice firm, clear, and utterly devoid of its earlier hysteria. "Don't threaten me. I'm done being afraid of you. I'm going to the police." Corbin's heart slammed against his ribs. A confession. She was going to confess. It was everything he had come for, the key to his freedom. "I'm going to them tomorrow morning," Amara continued, her words tumbling out in a rush of cathartic finality. "I'm going to tell them everything, about how you came to me after Corbin was arrested, how you preyed on my fear and my loneliness, how you convinced me that Corbin was guilty and that you were my only way out, how you told me to plant that extra evidence, the financial records linking Corbin to Thorne's competitors. I'll tell them it was all you, Darian, all of it." The line must have gone dead, because Amara let out a ragged sob. "He's going to kill me," she whispered to the empty room. But it wasn't a whisper of fear. It was a statement of fact. She knew what Darian was capable of. And now, so did Corbin. He wanted to burst in, to confront her, to drag her to the nearest police station himself. But his training held him back. He was a fugitive. His appearance would only complicate things, give Darian an angle to spin. The best move was to wait, to let her go to the police as planned. He would follow, observe from a distance, and present himself only after her statement was on the record. It was the smart play, the tactical play. He slipped back out the service door as silently as he had entered and returned to his stolen truck, his mind racing. He parked in a darkened alley with a clear view of the gallery's entrance. He would watch her all night if he had to. He would be her guardian angel, the ghost ensuring she made it to her confession. Hours crawled by. The city's pulse slowed, the streets emptied. Corbin sat in the cold cab of the truck, running on pure adrenaline. Just after 2 a.m., his vigil was broken. Headlights cut through the darkness, a vehicle moving far too fast for the deserted street. It was a black Porsche. It screamed to a halt directly in front of the gallery. Darian Price erupted from the driver's side, his face a mask of incandescent fury. He didn't use a key. He used a crowbar he pulled from his trunk, shattering the glass of the front door with a single, violent motion. Corbin's training, his careful plan, every calculated instinct screamed at him to stay hidden. But the sight of Darian, a man consumed by a murderous rage, storming into the building where Amara was alone, overrode everything. This was no longer a tactical situation. He grabbed a heavy tire iron from the truck bed. He was no longer a ghost. He was a Marine again, and he was going in. Corbin moved with the lethal efficiency of a soldier breaching a hostile building. He vaulted the low fence behind the gallery, the tire iron a cold, heavy weight in his hand. The back door, which he'd left unlocked, was his entry point. He slipped inside, the sound of shattered glass from the front of the building echoing in the silent space. A new sound reached him, Darian's voice, low and menacing, coming from Amara's office. "You stupid, sentimental fool!" Darian was snarling. "You were going to throw everything away for him?" "It's over, Darian," Amara's voice replied, trembling but defiant. "I've already sent copies of everything to a safe place. The bank records, your emails, everything. If something happens to me, it all goes public." Corbin reached the office door, peering through the small gap he'd created. The scene inside was a tableau of dread. Amara stood behind her desk, her face pale but resolute. Darian stood before her, his expensive suit rumpled, his handsome features twisted into a mask of pure rage. In his hand, he held a sleek silver pistol. "There is no safe place," Darian hissed, taking a step forward. "There's only you and me, and you just made your last mistake." That was Corbin's cue. He kicked the door open, the wood splintering from the frame. The explosion of sound made both Darian and Amara flinch. For a split second, Darian's eyes met Corbin's, and in them, Corbin saw not just rage, but a flicker of shocked disbelief. He had planned for the police, for lawyers, for consequences. He had not planned for the ghost to walk through his door. Corbin lunged, not at Darian, but toward Amara, trying to put himself between her and the gun. But Darian was fast. He raised the pistol. A deafening crack filled the small office. Amara gasped, a small, surprised sound, and a crimson flower blossomed on the chest of her cream-colored suit. She stumbled backward, her eyes locking with Corbin's. A universe of regret and apology passing between them in that final, terrible moment. Then she collapsed. Rage, pure and primal, washed over Corbin. He launched himself at Darian, the tire iron forgotten. They crashed into the desk, a whirlwind of desperate violence. Corbin's raw strength against Darian's panicked ferocity. The gun was between them, a cold piece of steel they both fought for. A second shot went off, wild, shattering a piece of art on the wall. Just as Corbin's fingers closed around Darian's wrist, forcing the gun loose, the wail of sirens sliced through the night air, growing impossibly loud, impossibly close. Benji and Neela, alerted by a silent alarm triggered when the front door was smashed, were already on the scene. They burst through the shattered entrance, guns drawn. Darian, ever the opportunist, saw his opening. With a final desperate shove, he pushed the gun into Corbin's hand and simultaneously screamed, "He's got a gun! He shot her!" Then he threw himself backward, feigning an attack. Corbin stood frozen over Amara's body. The warm, unfamiliar weight of the pistol in his hand, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. He looked from Amara's lifeless eyes to the barrel of the gun, and then up at the two detectives framed in the doorway, their weapons aimed squarely at his chest. He was caught. Framed again. "Drop it, Hayes! Now!" Benji yelled. But Corbin's soldier instinct screamed a different order. Survive. To be captured now was to be executed, legally or otherwise. He saw a back window leading to a narrow alley. In one fluid motion, he dropped the gun, kicked the window out, and vaulted through the opening, landing hard on the pavement below as the first police bullets whizzed past his head. Behind him, he heard the sharp, frantic barks of a K-9 unit being unleashed. The hunt was on again, but this time it was different. He was no longer just a fugitive. He was a cop killer in the making, and they would hunt him to the ends of the earth. He sprinted into the labyrinth of San Francisco's nighttime alleys, the dogs barking getting closer, a death knell in the darkness. The city's underbelly became Corbin's world. He scrambled through a network of storm drains and sewer tunnels, the K-9's frantic barks echoing behind him, growing fainter as he plunged deeper into the foul-smelling darkness. The chase was a blur of adrenaline and instinct, his body moving on autopilot, his mind replaying the gunshot, the look in Amara's eyes, the perfect damning setup. He finally emerged miles away, covered in filth, his body aching, his soul hollowed out. He was now wanted for 2 murders, the net tightening around him with every passing second. He found refuge in an abandoned Mooney bus depot, a graveyard of rusted metal and broken glass. Huddled in the cold, listening to the distant sirens, despair began to set in. Darian had won. He had an airtight story. The grieving boyfriend who tried to save his lover from her violent, escaped convict husband. Corbin was the perfect monster, and he had played his part to perfection. Then, through the fog of his grief and rage, a memory surfaced. It was from years ago, before the arrest, before their world had crumbled. He and Amara were in her studio. She was working on a new sculpture, a chaotic tangle of welded steel and copper pipes she called Unspoken. Corbin had asked what it meant. "It's a time capsule," she had explained, her eyes bright with passion. "It's full of secrets, things people think but never say, fears, regrets, truths. They're all locked away in here. Safe. He had dismissed it as artistic metaphor, but now the words echoed with a chilling new meaning. I've already sent copies of everything to a safe place. Her last words to Darian. It wasn't a bank vault or a lawyer's office, it was her art. The truth was hiding in plain sight. It was an insane gamble. The gallery was now a high-profile crime scene, sealed off, swarming with forensics teams and guarded around the clock. Breaking in would be a suicide mission. But it was the only mission he had left. He spent the next 48 hours in the shadows, observing. He watched the shift changes, timed the patrols, studied the layout of the police tape and the temporary floodlights. He was back in reconnaissance mode, planning an infiltration into a fortress. On the third night, under the cover of a thick San Francisco fog that rolled in from the bay, he made his move. Dressed in black, his face smeared with grease, he moved like a phantom. He scaled a drainpipe to the roof of the adjacent building, his calloused hands finding purchase on the cold brick. He used a length of stolen electrical cable as a rope, rappelling down into the narrow, dark alley behind the gallery. The back window he'd escaped through was now boarded up, but the police had overlooked a small ventilation grate near the roofline. It was a tight squeeze, a claustrophobic crawl through a dusty, cobweb-filled shaft. But he emerged inside, back in the silent, ghost-filled gallery. The building was different now. It was sterile, cold, crisscrossed with yellow tape. The air smelled of luminol and fingerprint powder. His heart pounded as he approached Amara's office. The unspoken sculpture stood in the corner, a chaotic metal form that now looked like a monument to their shattered lives. He ran his hands over the cold steel, searching for a seam, a hidden panel, anything. His fingers traced the jagged lines of the welds, feeling for an imperfection. There, a small, almost invisible discrepancy in a weld near the base. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket and began to pry at it. The metal groaned in protest. It felt like desecrating a tomb. Finally, with a soft click, a small, hollowed-out section of a copper pipe came loose. Tucked inside, wrapped in a small piece of velvet, was a single silver USB flash drive. He held it in his palm. It felt impossibly heavy. The weight of his past and his only possible future. He had the truth. But as he heard the crunch of gravel in the alley outside, an officer on an unscheduled patrol, he knew that getting the truth and using it were two very different things. He now had to escape the tomb for a second time, carrying the ghost of his wife's confession with him. Corbin slipped out of the gallery, the USB drive a burning ember in his pocket. He could have gone straight to the police, to Neela Abdullah, who he suspected was the only one who might listen. But that wasn't enough. Handing over the drive would clear his name, but it felt incomplete. It was a legal victory, not justice. Darian Price, the architect of his suffering, would be processed by the same flawed system that had failed him so completely. He would be a headline, a court case, a statistic. Corbin needed more. He needed a confession, not for the police, but for himself. He needed to see the man break. He used the last of his cash on a new burner phone and sent a single, untraceable text message to Darian Price. I have Amara's time capsule. Meet me where it all began. Top floor, midnight, come alone, or the whole world gets the truth. He didn't sign it. He didn't have to. Where it all began was the construction site of the Thorne Tower, the gleaming skyscraper that Marcus Thorne had been building when he was murdered, the very project that had been the catalyst for Darian's greed. The half-finished penthouse was a skeleton of steel and glass, open to the night sky. The wind howled through the empty window frames, a mournful sound high above the glittering lights of San Francisco. It was a place between worlds, a fitting stage for their final act. Corbin was there first, hidden in the shadows of the concrete pillars. He'd placed a small, high-fidelity audio recorder on a nearby steel beam, its tiny red light blinking like a patient eye. Darian arrived exactly at midnight. He wasn't afraid. He was arrogant. He stepped out of the construction elevator, his expensive suit immaculate even in the dusty environment. He saw Corbin step out of the shadows and actually smiled, a cold, predatory baring of teeth. "Hayes," Darian said, his voice smooth and confident. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. You've caused quite a bit of trouble, but the game is over. Give me the drive." "First, you tell me why," Corbin said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Amara. Why did you have to kill her? She was your partner in this. Darian laughed, a short, ugly sound that the wind snatched away. Partner? Amara was a pawn, a beautiful, naive, and ultimately sentimental pawn. She got weak. She was going to confess, to throw away this entire life I built for us because of some misplaced guilt. She became a liability. So I liquidated her. It was a business decision. The casual cruelty of the words was staggering. Corbin felt the rage building, the urge to snap the man's neck, but he held it in check. He needed more. And Thorne, he pressed, was that a business decision too? Thorne was an arrogant old fool. Darian spat, his composure finally cracking. He found out I was leveraging his charitable foundations to build my own portfolio. He was going to cut me off, ruin me. He called me to his office that night to fire me, but I came prepared. He looked at Corbin, his eyes gleaming with a mad pride. I knew all about you, the decorated soldier, the hero with supposed PTSD, the perfect fall guy. I used your registered gun, which Amara helped me get from your lockbox. I wore gloves. I planted your prints. It was a masterpiece. And you let me rot in a cage for 5 years, Corbin said, his voice a low growl. You should thank me, Darian sneered, stepping closer. Prison made you famous, but now it's time to end this. Give me the drive, and I'll let you disappear. A ghost for the rest of your life. It's more than you deserve. He held out his hand. Corbin looked at Darian's outstretched hand, then slowly pulled the USB drive from his pocket. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger. You went to all that trouble, Corbin said softly. You built this empire of lies, all for this. And with a flick of his wrist, he tossed the drive over the edge of the building. It tumbled into the abyss, a tiny silver speck disappearing into the city lights 1,000 feet below. Darian's face contorted in a mask of pure fury. You fool! What have you done? He screamed, lunging at Corbin. But Corbin didn't move. He just stood there and let Darian grab the front of his jacket. It's gone, Price, Corbin said, his voice calm and cold. Just like Amara, just like my life. He then looked past Darian, toward the blinking red light on the steel beam. But the truth isn't so easy to get rid of. Understanding dawned on Darian's face, followed by sheer, unadulterated panic. At that exact moment, the blinding beams of multiple flashlights flooded the penthouse, and the sound of dozens of police officers shouting filled the air. SFPD! Don't move! Benji and Neela stepped forward, guns leveled. Darian's face crumbled. The master manipulator, the man who controlled everything, was finally, hopelessly trapped. The trial of Darian Price was a media sensation, but the verdict was a foregone conclusion. The high-fidelity audio recording from the penthouse, a full, uncoerced confession delivered in Darian's own arrogant voice, was irrefutable. It was the nail in a coffin already sealed by the financial evidence Neela had uncovered and the contents of the real USB drive, which Corbin had handed to her just before luring Darian to the tower. The one he'd thrown over the edge had been a decoy. Darian Price was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was sent to Pelican Bay, destined to inhabit the very cell his victim had once occupied. Corbin Hayes was officially exonerated of all charges. The murder conviction was vacated. The escape and assault charges were dropped in light of the circumstances. The system, in its lumbering, imperfect way, had finally declared him an innocent man. He walked down the steps of the San Francisco Hall of Justice into the bright afternoon sun, a free man for the first time in over 5 years. The world felt too big, too loud, too fast. Reporters swarmed him, shouting questions, but he ignored them, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Detective Neela Abdullah was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps, away from the scrum. What now, Mr. Hayes? She asked quietly. I don't know, Corbin answered, his voice raspy. The words felt honest and empty. 5 years is a long time to be gone. The world kept spinning. I stood still. You can start over, Neela offered, her tone gentle. You're still young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Corbin gave a short, bitter laugh. Do I? My wife is dead. The woman I loved helped put me in a cage, and then died because she had a moment of conscience. I don't know if I'm supposed to mourn her or hate her." He looked at Neela, his eyes holding the profound weariness of a man who had fought too many wars, both overseas and within himself. "The hardest part is knowing that none of this would have happened if I wasn't who I am." Price didn't just pick a scapegoat. He picked a black man, a soldier. He knew exactly which buttons to press, what fears to prey on. He used the system's own prejudice as his weapon, and it worked perfectly. Neela nodded slowly. She couldn't deny the truth in his words. "The system is made of people, Mr. Hayes. It's as flawed and biased as we are, but sometimes people like you, and maybe even people like me, can force it to be better." Corbin looked up at the sky, a vast open blue that no longer felt like freedom, but like an empty expanse. Justice had been served, but it hadn't made him whole. It hadn't erased the 5 years in a concrete box, the betrayal, the loss. It had left a deep, indelible mark. "Thank you, Detective," he said, finally meeting her eyes, "for seeing the cracks in the file." He turned and walked away, not towards the cameras or the waiting taxis, but just walking, a solitary figure disappearing into the anonymous crowds of the city. Neela watched him go, a man vindicated but not victorious. His case would be a legendary one in the department, a cautionary tale of corruption and justice. But she knew the truth was more complex. There were no real winners here, only varying degrees of loss. The case served as a stark, painful lesson. Justice can right a wrong, but it can never truly heal the wound. The scar of injustice, once carved into a person's soul, remains forever. And for Corbin Hayes, freedom was just another word for the cage he would carry inside him for the rest of his life.